All right, welcome back to another episode of This Week in AI Security, brought to you by Firetail and the team behind the Modern Security Podcast. I've got about 5 or 6 stories to get into today. Let's get started. We're coming to you for the week of the 5th of February, 2026. Here we go. So I want to start this week's first story with something called Bizarre Bazaar, and that is bizarre like weird, bizarre like marketplace. So Bizarre Bazaar rhyming intentionally. Kudos to the team over at Pillar Security for uncovering this. Now, they uncovered this by planting some honeypots that look like weakly protected LLM infrastructure endpoints. And what this involves is it involves threat actors gaining unauthorized access to these endpoints. And they are using that access to steal computing resources for cryptocurrency mining. They're also reselling API access on dark markets. So they'll say like, hey, we found this compromised Olama instance that we have an API key to who wants to use it. Exfiltrating data from prompts and conversation history, attempting to pivot into internal systems via MCP servers. MCP, we're going to talk about a little bit more in today's episode, but for those who are not familiar, that's Model Context Protocol. It's a way of kind of exposing an LLM programmatically to other pieces of software that want to interact with it. And the most common attack vectors are self-hosted LLM setups, exposed or unauthenticated APIs in front of those setups, publicly accessible MCP environments, and development or staging environments with public IP addresses. A couple of things to note here. So these, aside from the exfiltration of the prompt data, these are not AI-specific attacks. These are actually typical attacks on infrastructure that backs LLMs. And so, if you think about the things we've talked about in many of the previous episodes of This Week in AI Security, we've got a recurring theme of the infrastructure and the services powering the LLM environment as being really kind of the weak points and the things to focus on when you're building your layered defense or defense in depth strategies. And important to understand here is that LLMs have known patterns. They have known ports that are exposed. They have known API structures. And many are, for instance, copying OpenAI as the most popular provider. They're copying OpenAI's APIs and making them compatible so you could swap out models without having to redo your application code. Exposed APIs in front of this infrastructure get indexed quickly and can be searched on Shodan. I always tell people anything on the internet can be found, and generally way faster than you actually think it can be found. So it's something to really keep an eye out on. Make sure that if you're putting an LLM powered application online, you're taking appropriate measures to make sure that you're only exposing exactly the things, you're tightening up security around some of that exposed infrastructure, et cetera. All right, moving on to the next story. We've got a CVE on an MCP server. So I mentioned that we're going to talk about Model Context Protocol a little bit. And so Model Context Protocol is, again, a way for LLMs to interact with other LLMs, or for software to interact with LLMs, or some combination thereof. A lot of people think about it as kind of being the LLM wrapper around an API. And so the parallel that most people draw between MCPs is two APIs. And what we've got here is a CVE, so again, a common vulnerability or enumeration on a Gemini MCP tool that allowed remote code execution. So Gemini, we've talked about many, many times with various things, including disclosures that the Firetail team has done, very popular service from Google, pretty common CVE, a little bit more of the same. We've talked about this theme or this category of vulnerabilities on previous episodes. I'm not going to go into more details. Other than to just remind you that, as always, all of our stories are linked from the show notes. You can get more information there. All right, moving on to our next story, MoltBook. So we talked last week quite a lot about the Claude bot, CLAW, not Claude, from Anthropic, now renamed into MoltBot. This is meant to be a kind of, super agent for personal productivity purposes. And one of the craziest organizations over one of the craziest developments, rather, over the last couple of weeks has been the launch of this, and then the launch of something called MoltBook, which is like a Facebook for these AI agents to interact with each other. It actually has more of a Reddit style interface, and it's more of a kind of like, comment and response, and somebody posts a thread and the conversation continues from there. And again, the vulnerabilities here and the security incident here is not specific to the LLM aspect of it. In fact, the MoltBook social network was vibe coded, meaning that it was created by the creator of MoltBot, who just said, hey, I have a vision for this thing. I went to an AI powered coding assistant, something like a Claude Code or something like a Lovable or a Base 44 or one of these platforms. And I just described what I wanted, and then the AI wrote the code for me. So the research team over at Wiz poked around a little bit, did not take them very long to find a Supabase, which is a kind of a NoSQL database, API key exposed in a client-side JavaScript. They were able to then use that API key also to understand, the front-end interaction with the back-end, get instructions on where to access this Supabase instance, then unauthenticated access to the entire production database, including 1.5 million API keys and lots more of data in there. So again, the infrastructure around the applications is the weak point. Are you sensing a theme? I am a little bit. All right, moving on. What I actually wanted to highlight for our next story is a really good write-up from a noted security researcher named Eyal Estrin. I hope I'm getting that name right. Eyal is somebody whose work I followed for several years. He is a well-known researcher, especially in cloud security and in areas like that. Based in Israel, I don't know his company affiliation at this point, but he put out a nice guide to how to secure this thing. So if you still think that the productivity gains are worth it and you want to deploy this agent for your own purposes, you might want to have a read through this guide on things to do. I'm just going to read off the kind of 6 to 8 recommendations and talk a little bit about my analysis of them. So number one, lock down the gateway. By default, this MoltBot thing will actually get access to everything, but maybe you don't want that to be the case. And also maybe you don't want it to have kind of a reverse proxy effect where it exposes things from your local machine onto the internet. So lock down that gateway. Number two, enforce strict access control. So who can access what? Well, that also applies to this kind of agentic thing. What can it access? Number three, isolate the runtime environment. This, in my mind, is very parallel to microsegmentation from networks. Reduce the blast radius. So if all things do go wrong, how can you actually control and contain what this thing might have access to? Number four, apply least privilege to agent capabilities. This is very much an identity-focused control. Make sure that you're only granting MoltBot permissions to do the things that you're comfortable with it doing. Maybe you want it to be able to create calendar events, but not read, or maybe not to edit or update, right? So think about what level of permissions you want to give this agent. Number five, secure credentials and secrets. This is just good secret management. Make sure that you're not giving it passwords in plain text. Make sure that you are using good practices like environment variables instead, or encrypting these secrets in some way. Number five, continuous auditing and monitoring. Log this stuff. Log what it's doing. Have the ability to go back and check. If you're concerned, hey, did this do something that I didn't expect it to do? Well, you've got the logs. Make sure you turn that on. Number seven, harden browser automation. The browser is one of the main things that this MoltBot is known to use. And so what you want to do is you want to make sure that the Chromium-based browser automation is secure, is good code, and is only, again, having access to the things you want. Number 9, I think, I might have lost track, prompt level safety rules. Check the prompts. Give it some guidelines on what it is and is not allowed to prompt. And last but not least, incident response preparedness. So if and when things do go wrong, how are you going to recover from this? So think through some worst case scenarios and then just map out to yourself. Maybe you just jot it down in a notepad or something like that. What if it messes up my calendar? What if it texts some or sends out some files that I don't want it to send out? Then what am I going to do about that? The interesting thing to me from that entire list, the only AI specific control is in there is prompt level safety rules. Everything else is kind of a core cybersecurity principle, foundational thing, foundational control, microsegmentation, least privilege, things that we would have all heard again and again and again. So again, the link is in the show notes. Nice little guide, good read, quick read, gives you some real thoughts about what to do in a practical sense. All right, moving on. Bondu. Bondu is an AI-powered dinosaur toy. I heard about this story via Australia and a news source down in Australia. I don't know if this is something that is an Australian company and hasn't made it outside Australia just yet, but it is an AI-powered dinosaur toy. And again, this is the infrastructure around the application that is really to blame. So the chat logs were actually available to anyone with a Gmail account. So if you or your child was interacting with this thing, that is most likely a kind of speech to text mechanism that then, kind of goes back to the LLM, retrieves the responses, et cetera, for that interaction. 50,000 chat log records exposed to anybody with a Gmail account. So the kind of authentication that was applied there was really not super great, super controlled. All right, moving on to our last story for the week. This is something that definitely hit the headlines in a lot of different places around the world. Trump's acting cyber chief uploaded sensitive files into a public version of ChatGPT. So about a year ago, a gentleman with the last name Godumakala was appointed as the interim head of the country's cyber defense agency, CISA, and had requested access to ChatGPT. That access was actually not approved, but an exception was granted on a temporary basis. And then this gentleman proceeded to upload 4 documents. Now, none of those documents were marked as classified, but they were marked for official use only. And so uploading into ChatGPT might actually be within bounds if you're using the enterprise version, but he used the public version. And the public version, as has been widely reported, has IP rights ownerships and access to the data for training purposes and whatnot. So this is considered a pretty serious, if not security breach, let's say data mishandling and privacy breach of potentially sensitive information. This is the kind of thing that makes you step back for a second and say, well, wait, what's going on here? Are our most trusted institutions and organizations not following core basic guidelines? Or is it the case that the temptation of AI and the benefits are actually just too good to ignore? Or maybe both? I'm going to leave you with that thought to kind of ponder on your own. That's our last story for this week. Again, signing off for the week of the 5th of February, 2026. As always, rate, review, like, follow, subscribe, all that good stuff. If you've got any stories, send our way. And we will talk to you next week on This Week in AI Security. Bye-bye.